an executive in the Chicago Cubs organization likes my music, and so extended this invitation to go to Chicago and throw out this first pitch. I worked way too hard for this moment, so I was going to let this thing rip with almost everything I had. And I pumped this thing in. It was a strike. And the moment I will never forget, and I might say was the greatest moment of my life, was to hear 30,000 people in this historic stadium cheer for me.
Please welcome Rachel Giese and Rich Terfry.
So, Rich, let's start by clarifying what this book is. We were talking about this in the back. It's not a memoir. It has memoir quality. So how would you describe this book and what you were trying to do with it?
Well, I guess there's a few different ways that I could look at that and approach that. I've been writing and putting stuff out for 20 years as Buck 65 in the form of songs. And I have created not much of one, but a bit of an audience for those songs. And so part of me thought, figuring that audience might be the primary or initial audience for this book, then how can I make that sort of a treat for them and make it insightful for them, or almost like some sort of treasure hunt for them. So I went over a lot of my songs, and I thought, just kind of picked out things along the way, lines here and lines there or whatever. And I thought, if I can, through this book, offer, some insights, into those songs for people, while at the same time trying to create, some overarching story, then that's maybe what I would like to do. So in a lot of cases, I don't spell out. I don't say, okay, there was a song called this, and this is the story behind it. I just sort of, let all those things come up as they come up. And I didn't do that with every song I've ever written. But I will say that, for example, as we were talking about earlier, I have a song from an album called Secret House Against the World, called Drunk Without Drinking.
There we go.
About being a door-to-door encyclopedia salesman.
So, Rich, let's start by...
I've never been drunk. I don't drink. And I've never sold encyclopedias. But, writing songs, I've always just allowed myself to use my imagination as much as I saw fit. If I, felt inspired by something, which in some cases might have been a photograph I've seen in a book or a painting or God knows what, and I kind of approached this the same way, really let myself use my imagination as much as I wanted to at all times, which I now realize here in the last few weeks is super weird for people.
Right.
And then I guess another way to look at it, and I forget exactly what your question was now, but
okay. The answer's great, so it doesn't really matter what the question was.
Right. But I was just going to say that I started writing this when my wife left, mm-hmm. and I just kind of didn't really know what to do with myself, and I screwed up my marriage, and I was trying to figure out why and how. And started looking back and thinking, well, is there some crap, from my past that I didn't really sort out? So I thought, well, maybe at the same time I can, and while still using my imagination and stuff, but maybe I can just sort of untangle the past and take a walk through it and that sort of thing. So that was the impetus to get started. And then in the intro it was mentioned that I wrote an album called Never Love, And I kind of started those two projects at the same time, and still sort of think of them as companion pieces to an extent.
Well, and Never Love is about sort of after the dissolution of the marriage, and this is your life
leading up to the marriage.
Leading up to marriage. The album came out first, the record came out first, this came out after. Was that something that you were planning on to have?
My vision, my hope at the beginning was that they might come out around the same time, but you know, Warner's a big company, Random House is a big company. It's hard to get these things to line up, and some things, you know, were delayed, and so, you know, there's some months in between. Well, I guess closer to a year between those releases, but nevertheless, they're both out there in the world now, and there's no obligation to buy the album. But if you read the book and you think, oh, well, so then what happened? There's this.
The album is just waiting right there. They don't have to wait for like 3 years for you to write the sequel to the book.
Exactly.
I mean, you set it up in the foreword that this is somewhat experimental when it comes to this being sort of a collection of tall tales, a play between you know, the real and the imagined, or the real and the fabricated. You know, you write. And I want to ask you about this. My imagination remains more reliable than my memory. It may be worth bearing that in mind as you turn these pages. So tell me a bit about how your imagination has served you as even something more, being even more reliable than a memory in terms of being in the world and being an artist.
Well, I feel where it served me most was in my hometown growing up, because this was in a real small rural town in Nova Scotia, middle of nowhere. Few hundred people. I don't know the exact population, and I know it's grown since I grew up. I grew up on a dirt road. Not really anything in terms of businesses. There weren't jobs there to be had by anybody. And you know, there were a lot of lakes and trees, woods, forest. And so when you're a kid, was that me? You're pretty much relying on your imagination to just do anything. Of course, this is pre-internet, and really all you had was trees and lakes. So you had to figure out what to do with that to occupy yourself and entertain yourself. But there was trouble waiting to be found and to be had. And a lot of my friends growing up found it. I don't know what made me think of this, but earlier today I had a memory, and I allude to this vaguely. I kind of figured out a funny little way to work it in with one character in the book, but my town was small enough that we didn't have a high school, and we were right on the line for the county line in Nova Scotia separating Halifax County and Hants County. And geographically speaking, the nearest high school to my town was, you know, maybe 20 minutes away, but it was on the other side of the county line. And I guess it's just the way the school board works, but it meant that we had to go to a school that was much further away, so it was an hour away. But we did have a school that went up to junior high school, and one year in the parking lot for the school, they installed this one little gas pump for the school buses to fill up. Otherwise, I guess, I don't know, well, they were for the buses. And a lot of my friends figured out that gasoline would drip out of that pump a little bit, and so they would run over to it with bags, plastic bags or paper bags, and just get a few drops of gasoline in there and then huff it. And it would really scramble people's brains. And then there was, like, you know, pressure. I mean, you know, not everyone, but most kids did it. Most of the kids I hung out with, and they'd be like, "It's super fun, man, do it." I was just too afraid to do it, and I never did it. But you know, you do that long enough, and that's going to mess you up. And there were lots of other ways to just sort of go astray in a little nowhere's town. And so I have a feeling that escaping into my imagination kind of steered me out of that trouble in a lot of cases. And I think being as imaginative as I was kind of kept me a kid. And I loved it. I loved being a kid, and I never wanted to be anything else but it seemed that a lot of my friends growing up were in a hurry to be adults, like a lot of kids are.
Although it's interesting because when you mention the word escape, because to me it feels like one of the themes in this book is this sense of restlessness and escape that has either driven you or plagued you. I think sometimes a bit both in a way.
Yeah.
And when I think about the two loves that really shaped your childhood, baseball and hip hop, like neither of them were really easy to come by in the town you grew up in. So you developed these passions for things that were not sort of organic or native to where you were. And so I wanted to ask you a bit about the discovery of these two passions in a place that really wasn't there to plant those seeds for you. So
yeah, they were bad choices. both of those choices were bad. And,
you think? I mean, it feels like you've done well by both choices.
And I've had a lot of, they've both given me a lot of fulfillment. But just like the odds were so stacked against it, it didn't make sense to the people around me. I mean, my mother was super confused by both of those interests that I had, and.
So talk about. I mean, let's start with baseball because that sort of the book starts with with you getting a glove. How did you what was it about baseball? You talk about the sport, sort of intellectualism, the kind of the solitude of being part of a team, but you didn't even really play on a team growing up. So talk a bit about what your experience was with baseball when you were a kid.
Yeah, there was just a little tiny bit, that I would encounter. So. Pickup games maybe here and there for a few weeks during the summer, organized by, some of the bigger kids. And then there was maybe a week during the school year where in gym class, maybe when spring first rolled around, that it would be, baseball time. And my gym teacher, who I thought was the coolest guy in the world, but he lived in the basement apartment of the house across the road from me growing up, and I thought he was so cool that for years when I was growing up, when people said, what do you want to be when you grow up, I always said gym teacher. I don't know why I thought he was so cool, but he was right there, and I can remember one day being in that yard of that house where he grew up, and we had just kind of done a bit of baseball in gym class. And he had a tennis ball, and he was tossing it to me like grounders and making it bounce and trying to teach me to not be afraid of the ball. And I just took instruction from him really well, I suppose. And he would do it once, and I would fail miserably. But he'd try a second time, and it was better. And then a third time, I said, "Okay, you got it." And because I looked up to him, and I just somehow stumbled on a thing that somehow I just had some kind of knack for, I ran with it. His encouragement meant everything to me. And I guess I was really desperately looking for it without knowing it, without realizing it. But just to have someone that I admired or looked up to say, "Hey, you're good at that," made me want to do it forever. And I may have even borrowed his tennis ball. I don't know where I found a tennis ball, because it's not like there were tennis balls around Mount Uniacke either, but I found one, and I just threw it against the wall of my house for 8 years. 8 years throwing. I just realized what happened here.
You good?
This is going to sound better now.
Okay.
Yep. So I just kept throwing that ball against the wall and teaching myself, how to play, and imagining that just me and that wall meant playing in Game 7 of the World Series, and I was the hero and all that stuff.
Yeah. And your discovery of hip hop. What was that moment when you heard your first hip hop song? Okay,
so I was born in 1972, and if you can remember the 70s, and in particular, if you're a rural person, you might remember that there was a real thing happening there for a while of truck driving songs, and some of them became hits. And a song that I can remember loving when I was a kid was Convoy. And but there was also Phantom 309, remember that one, and a few others. And funny enough, I don't know why this was a common thing in truck driving songs, and I wouldn't have known to call it this at the time, but they were in the style of what I guess is called the talking blues. So I'm trying to remember who it was that sang Convoy, but he didn't sing, he spoke it. It was kind of the spoken rhyming delivery of him telling this story. And something about that song really got under my skin. And I was obsessed with it. I loved it. And then when I got a little older, there was just a revolution that took place among the youth of my area, in that 30 minutes away as you crept toward the suburbs of Halifax, a roller skating rink opened up. And there was no bus from my town to get there, but you could usually hitch a ride with someone on weekends to get out to the roller skating rink. Now we're in the early 80s, and once in a while the DJ there would play some hip-hop music. We're talking Grandmaster Flash, Sugar Hill Gang, and Soul Sonic Force, stuff like that. And honest to goodness, when I heard it, I equated it to the truck driving songs. I thought, oh, cool, more truck driving music. I suppose it's also important to note that for kids growing up where I grew up, the coolest thing in the world was an 18-wheeler truck.
Right.
And a few of my friends' dads were truck drivers, and they would be away for long periods of time. But when they came home and they came rolling around the corner onto Rockwell Drive, where I grew up, kicking up dust, and you saw that big truck coming up the road, and we'd be all out there going like this. And, if they would honk for you, I mean, just your day was made. Like, that was the greatest thing that could happen. And to this day, if I'm out driving and I see a truck go by and I see a little kid in the back window of a car going like this, it still makes me real happy. And so it all worked together. To me, somehow, I mean, it's ridiculous looking back, but so rap music was truck driving music to me, and just all fit into that fantasy of 18-wheelers and life on the road. So my obsession grew, and I just needed to find more and more of that music however I could, which was almost impossible. But it was an obsession, and it was just too late at that point. There was nothing was gonna stop me. I just needed to learn more about the music. It took a long time for me to realize it had nothing to do with truck driving. But that was it. And so that curiosity was being fueled to a certain extent by visits to the roller skating rink on the weekends. And then the first luckiest thing that ever happened to me in my life was that my friend Mark's sister, Adrienne, older sister, she was my babysitter, and she started dating one of the DJs at the roller skating rink. And sometimes when she babysat, he would come. And I felt like just like the luckiest kid in the world, because he was a hero. And everyone looked up to the DJ at the roller skating rink, and I couldn't believe he was in my house. But I got to ask him a lot about the music and about records, and so luckily for me, kind of like my gym teacher that lived across the road, I now had another teacher that I had access to with this thing that I was interested in. And, so he helped me. He wasn't, able to help me to a super deep extent, but he taught me what he knew, and that was enough to keep me going.
Do you think it would have, in a way, the fact that you were so cut off from bigger influences, that you kind of had to work with what you had, was actually better for you in a way? Or do you look back and think, if only I'd grown up in a bigger place, I would have had more exposure to baseball or music or the kind of culture that you were into?
I wonder about that all the time, and I don't know. But for a variety of reasons, I was an introvert. I don't know if a person is born an introvert. I can speculate on why I may have become one if you're not born one. But if I wasn't out playing in the dirt, I was just sort of hiding out in my bedroom. And I needed something to do in my bedroom too. And so maybe just with my obsessive, personality, to have that sort of challenge and almost scavenger hunt, sort of approach to things, it did work for me. And it meant that my approach really with both of these interests I had was really more intellectual than anything else, very analytical. And so, yeah, with just the sort of personality I had, that limited access was really good for me. I was sort of turned on by the idea that I'm really going to have to, work hard to, find what I'm looking for here. And the sense of satisfaction that I would get when there was that discovery was so strong. And I have sensations that I can still recall to the point where I can feel it physically, where my heart would race. It was almost unbearable. I mean, that's how it's been for me, I guess, with a lot of emotions generally in my life to this day, where it's almost unbearable. But whether it was opening a pack of baseball cards, or finding a book in the library about hip-hop music, or somehow just stumbling on a record or tape somewhere. I mean, my heart would race to the point where I almost felt like I was going to pass out. But I guess I just thrived on that excitement. And although it was almost terrifying, I wanted it. I wanted to feel that way.
I wanted to ask you just on that question of being an introvert and sort of circling back to the book, and when we were talking in the back, and this is how you've been talking about it in some of the interviews I've read, is that these are the stories of Buck 65, your stage name or your alter ego. And when you say that you're an introvert, I'm wondering, does having an alter ego or a stage persona, is that helpful to you as a performer and an artist? Like, I mean, I don't imagine there's a bright line between Rich and Buck, but I imagine they represent different parts of you.
Yeah, I mean, I would never have been able to do anything, I don't think, if I wasn't able to just wear another hat while I was doing it. And eventually, I guess, to jump ahead in the story, in a sense, my interest in the music eventually led me to just trying my own hand at it. But that meant just writing things and secretly kind of experimenting with a tape deck in my bedroom and that sort of thing. And eventually, over many years, it just sort of snuck out somehow, and there was a bit of an interest in what I was doing that I guess just started with my friends. But eventually, if someone does take an interest in what you're doing in that way, then the expectation becomes, well, you got to share it, which in the music context means you got to get up on stage and perform. And that went completely against every instinct that I had as an introvert, because I was just hiding out in my bedroom and sorting through, my thoughts, feeling like I didn't really have anyone else to talk to. And so the thought of getting up on stage and, sharing what I was doing was totally terrifying. Still is, if I kind of let that down for a sec, and it's down now, so I'm terrified. So yeah, I think I just needed to, invent a character and come up with a name, and in some cases, especially early on in my career, a question I always used to get was about my thing for alter egos, because I used to have tons of them. So I used to just make up all these characters and either release music under their name or give them different jobs, and through the kind of prime years that I was starting out making music, and in the hip hop world, you were supposed to have a posse, but I was just out in rural Nova Scotia, by myself, and all my friends were more into Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath and stuff. So I just, made up my posse. So for example, I took my middle name and the name of the road I grew up on and came up with Johnny Rockwell, who was a male model. And so I'd have songs about my friend Johnny Rockwell, male model, which partly came from this weird obsession I developed when I was a kid with fashion television, hosted by Jeannie Becker, that I watched religiously every weekend. I was really into that show. So I liked the idea of Johnny Rockwell kind of living in that world. It's ridiculous. And this is all like on a dirt road,
right.
Really before I had it figured out. And this is like, let's say 1985, and I'm listening to the Beastie Boys and LL Cool J, and I'm seeing how they dress, right? And so I went out, and there was always be these track suits in those days in particular. And so I needed to find one, and I found this Adidas thing, but looking back, it was designed for gymnastics, not so it was super tight. And I don't know if you remember those Adidas track pants that had a stirrup under the foot, and I'd walk around with this crappy radio up on my shoulder, up a dirt road, and just the locals just looking at me, shaking their heads, or other days pretending I was a male model. And I guess an important thing just to note, just to paint a picture for you, is that a big discovery for me was by accident. One day I was driving in the city with my mother. I guess we had errands to run or something, so we were in Halifax, and I was skipping through the dial, and I discovered the Dalhousie University campus station, and lo and behold, they were playing rap music on the radio, and I couldn't believe it. And so when I got back home, I was looking all over to try to find that frequency, but their wattage wasn't strong enough to reach my town. And so in my logic, I thought, okay, I'm over the horizon from Halifax, so there are too many obstructions. That's why we don't get the signal. So I need to get to higher ground. So it helped that I was on a mountain, Mount Uniacke, but it wasn't high enough. So I went scouting around my town. I forget if the story's in the book or not, but I found the tallest tree in Mount Uniacke, and I would listen perched quite precariously at the top of this tree in my getup. And I felt I had to get really high, so I'd be literally at the top of this tree, just swaying around, mountain. It was windy up there, and I was getting blown around, listening to this radio show. And again, people just driving by and just thinking there's really something wrong with this kid up in a tree. And I was most of the time up in that tree for years. Yeah.
So did it feel, because the book goes on to, you document, and again, it's sort of you, it's sort of Buck, it's sort of, it's fantastical and real and a mixture, but there is this sense of almost so you get discovered and suddenly you're this touring musician and you're playing at these festivals and you're getting all this attention. Your sense of that almost seems as surreal as an experience as the stuff from your childhood, is the crazy stories from your childhood. Was that being a kid from where you were and being the kid that had been up in the tree with the radio, and then suddenly here you are, you're a real musician on stage performing.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to experience that, given where you came from?
Well, so to that point, when I started making music, I barely ever left Nova Scotia. Back at a certain point, I forget if it was in the 80s, maybe there was a time when the Canadian dollar did fairly well against the US dollar, and my family, like a lot of families, would cross-border shop. And so for like March break, we would drive into Maine and go to these little towns that had like factory outlet stores. We were looking for bargains, and that was about it. And Maine really looks a lot like Nova Scotia, and that was about the extent of my travels. But then, early interest in my music it was very underground, and so it seemed that I was reaching other kind of weirdos like me. And one of the first weirdos I seemed to reach was a guy named Thomas. I can't remember his last name, but he was from the town of Ghent in Belgium. And he somehow got in touch, and he said, "I got to get you over here." And so I went almost literally from rural Nova Scotia to kind of like ancient Europe, like in a flash, and I just didn't know what I was getting myself into at all. And Thomas didn't really know either. He just didn't know what he was doing, and the whole thing was a disaster. But there I was in this beautiful ancient place, and then more and more trips like that started happening. And then the next place I lived after Nova Scotia, just because things started to happen in my career, was Paris, France. So I went from living in as unsophisticated, oh man, sorry about that, I meant to turn that off, in as unsophisticated a place in the world as possible to the most cosmopolitan and sophisticated place in the world. Cell phones are new to me. I don't even know how to turn this off. So yeah, I mean, it was a bit of whiplash going on with that, and overwhelming. And then, yeah, certainly as that journey began to unfold for me, it was surreal, to say the very least. And it was all happening very fast. It was confusing, exciting too, though, don't get me wrong. And because there was interest in what I was doing in Europe and in the U.S., a lot of other places, there were even just like culture shock and just like things like that I was getting used to and navigating and figuring out. But I just didn't know what was happening to me. It all happened very fast, and it was for a while there kind of depressing. And I had a Well, I had a girlfriend right around the time I signed a record deal, and we lived in Nova Scotia together, and neither of us really did anything, and so we were just joined at the hip all the time. And then suddenly I just had to be gone all the time, and it broke us up. We weren't able to figure that out. And so suddenly I was very far away from home, and my new career kind of got between me and my girlfriend, and I didn't know what was going on, and I was spending a lot of time in countries where I didn't speak the language, doing business with people, promoters, because this is at the kind of lowest level when I was just getting started out, who didn't really know what they were doing. It might be a 50-50 shot that at the end of the night you'd actually get paid. Lots of nights just sleeping in a train station. In those early days, I would finish a show and say, so if anyone has a place where I can stay tonight, come let me know. And some nights, someone would offer up, but a lot of nights, no one would. And so I remember a very strange night being in Edinburgh in Scotland, which is a beautiful city, but had nowhere to stay. And it was winter, very damp. I was in Waverley train station, and there was an arsonist on the loose that night, so half of Edinburgh was on fire. So there's fires burning everywhere, and I'm in Edinburgh, and I didn't know anybody, and I had no place to stay. And so as you can imagine, just as this kid who only had his imagination coming from a rural place, and all of a sudden I'm looking up on top of a mountain and seeing this beautiful castle lit by all these fires burning around the city below. I mean, it's almost too much to handle.
You're almost like looking for a dragon. Like, where did this
Pretty much. Yeah, exactly right.
Do we have a couple more minutes before the questions? Okay, so I just want to ask a couple more things.
Geez, that was fast.
I know. I wanted to ask you about, before we wrap up and open this up to questions from the audience, because we were talking in the back before we came out here, just about the process of writing a book versus writing music. And I wanted to get to that because I thought what you said about it was really interesting, about the experience of, and you talked a bit about it earlier, about, you write you've written in your musics about being an encyclopedia salesman, and that never really happened. But
right.
Did you find it like restrictive or limited to put stuff down in prose form, given that your music is so inventive and experimental and genre hopping? Did you find that it was a challenge to write a book?
I did, but almost in the opposite way of what you describe. So first of all, I'll say that from a creative approach, as I mentioned earlier, I used the exact same approach, and no one really told me, you can't do that. You can't just, start with this thing and then just let your imagination, go wild. I mean, to me, the book is almost like, when I'm writing lyrics, it's sort of poetic, and you give yourself the license to whatever. I just took really the exact same approach that I've always taken writing lyrics with this. But the big difference is that when writing lyrics to a piece of music, you're beholden to meter and rhyme. And so you're kind of directed by that a little bit. And maybe just because of practice, I find relatively easy. But when you have no restrictions like that whatsoever, then all you can really do is absolutely labor over every single word, and bit of punctuation. You really have to worry about the meter or whatever. And so it was at total agony, and it took forever. And sometimes I would really just grind all day long and only come up with a sentence because I was laboring over the choice of words so much. And then at a certain point, I read a quote from a famous writer, and I wish I could remember who, but someone a long time ago said that that's okay. Sometimes a day's work can just be a sentence, and you have to feel okay about that. And that honestly made me feel a little bit better about the process. But yeah, in a way, it would have been easier if I just had made the whole book rhyme. I just think that would have made this whole thing easier for everybody.
And the last thing I wanted to ask you is, you were writing this book and you were writing Never Love in this really difficult period. This has been a rough few months leading up to it, and then the release of the album and the book coming out. Do you feel like you gained some insight through the creative work? Do you feel like you've come to a place of peace, or is the next project going to be more introspective, or do you feel like maybe now you've kind of cleaned the slate a bit with the record and the book?
I feel as though those processes helped untangle a lot of thoughts. And so it just gave me a certain amount of clarity, but I don't think I figured anything out, to be honest with you. And I don't know if I will through the same means. I feel like I tried everything. I tried a book, I tried a bunch of songs, I tried posts on Twitter or whatever else. And so now it's just therapy, really. So I did go to therapy also right at the same time that I started this when my wife left. And I don't know if you've been down this road before, but it's hard to find a good therapist. And even just to find good help, really. I don't want to be critical of really great institutions that we have here, because we're blessed to have a facility like CAMH here, which is so well funded and does so much great work. But I remember at the time just really struggling and not quite sure what to do with myself. And so I went down to CAMH, just said, I just need some help kind of getting through this time. And sat down with someone, we chatted for about 30 minutes, and then they sent me home with a piece of paper with a hotline number on it. They said, yes, next time you're feeling like that, just call this number. And I thought, that is just not the help I need at all. And I was desperate for help. So I went looking for it. It took a long time to find a good fit for a therapist, and then I thought I found one, and then that process was weird. This leap was taken suddenly one day with a therapist that was way off track, and it made me real uncomfortable. And so I got out of there, and then really kind of, bore down on this for a while, and then kind of, back at the end of this past winter, dove back in headlong. And luckily for me, and it wasn't easy, and I did go to see a lot of different people, but it feels like a blessing. I just found the best guy in the world, who I feel is now maybe the most important person in my life, who really has been helping me a lot. So I'm just really keeping the focus there right now more than anything else. That's not to say that I won't continue to explore things through different ways and through music and even through my imagination and so on and so forth. But I guess the point is that I'm kind of willing to try anything to kind of sort through some things. I do want to write another book, and I have another one in mind. There was one story that I thought might fit into this book, and then I realized it was so big that it wouldn't fit. It would kind of swallow up the whole book, and so I thought I will save this, and it will stand alone. And it's just 124. It will be, if I can get this thing done, it will document one 24-hour period from one of those very surreal nights when I was on tour. It was one of my very first tours, super wet behind the ears, fresh out of the woods in Nova Scotia.
You still had the tracksuit with the stirrups.
Yeah, man, I'm still wearing stirrups. Stirrups and spurs. And I was in Eugene, Oregon, and sometimes just to say that word Eugene is enough for some people to say, uh-oh, because that's a weird place, man. And I remember I arrived late. I took a Greyhound bus to Eugene, college town, Northwestern University, and I had to get right on stage. And afterwards, I found out kind of the hard way that they had no, I don't want to say proper accommodations lined up for me. It wasn't a hotel. They arranged for me to spend the night in a cabin deep in the woods with 5 strippers. The promoter of the show thought that this would be a nice treat for me. And there was a lot of just pills and weird animals, things. It was really the weirdest and most terrifying night of my entire life. And there's a book in there. I want to write it.
Yeah.
I hope I can write it.
Your editor and publicist are here, so I feel like you should start taking pre-orders right now, because I feel like everyone's waiting for that story. So
just mention that this night in Eugene, after my show, all of my equipment was stolen, and I later found out that it was stolen by a guy who had his whole head wrapped in silver duct tape.
I think there's a book there. I feel like you should go home tonight and start writing it right away.
I want to.
There are 3 questions on this page, but they're all, I like them all. I'll start with the first. This is a baseball question.
Okay.
Who's the best pitcher of all time?
Oh yeah, best pitcher of all time. I'm gonna say That's hard. I'm going to say Nolan Ryan, someone who I grew up watching, who was, even while he was alive, was almost a mythical guy and seemed to be that first guy that people saw that reached that magic number of throwing a baseball 100 miles an hour. And just stories of that. Everyone knew that there was this guy from Texas that could throw a ball that hard. And he was just so dominant throughout his career. He played for a long time. His arm somehow never blew out. I had a chance to see him in Cleveland. I think it was in 1992. I went to a game there, and I had terrible seats way up in the bleachers in the outfield, but from all the way up there, probably a matter of 400 feet away, I could hear him grunt as he threw, even above, the sound of the crowd, which was an amazing thing. And there's just so many great Nolan Ryan stories. So right off the top of my head, that's who I would say. But this new kid that the Jays just picked up, David Price, he's good, and
when you were talking, and I could just hear the enthusiasm in your voice, do you almost wish that you could be a kid seeing David Price? Like, is there something about, like, in a way, being a kid and seeing someone that great in a sport is a different kind of experience than an adult, or do you think you can still appreciate it?
No, it's a different thing. It's a totally different thing, and I'm lucky enough that just living a few doors down from me is some friends, a couple that have a son who's 8, and he's the same age I was when I really started to light up about baseball, and I was hanging out with him just before I came over here, and we were talking about favorite players and this and that, and in a way he sort of keeps that alive for me, and I can see through his eyes that the way he evaluates a player is completely different from the way most adults do, and I try to still do it the same way he does. But it's just it's a different kind of thing. Is anyone here? I don't expect there to be a lot of big time baseball fans here, but you remember the Expos, right? And then they made it to the playoffs in 1981, I think it was, and they were playing the Dodgers. And do I see an Expos cap back there? I do.
You do.
And it looked like the Expos were on their way to the World Series, and then they did this really unusual move of pulling in one of their starting pitchers to pitch in relief, a guy named Steve Rogers, and he came in and immediately gave up a home run to this guy, Rick Monday, who already had a reputation of being a great American hero because a few years prior, some protesters ran out onto the field where he was playing and lit an American flag on fire. They were about to, and then he came running and picked up the flag and ran across the field with it. So there's all these iconic images of Rick Monday running across a baseball field with an American flag. And he hit this home run that just sank Canada's, chances forever. And 2 or 3 years later, through some hard work of my father, I had the opportunity to meet the whole team, the Montreal Expos, and I was so excited. And Steve Rogers was there, and even though I was probably 11, I hated him. And he was the one guy who I didn't want my photo with him. I didn't ask him for his autograph or anything. Just a little kid, and I was so excited, but Steve Rogers, I couldn't even look at him.
Time for a couple more. Who's your favorite young artist making music in Toronto right now, and what advice would you have for them?
Let's see. That's tricky. Okay, I'm just gonna say what comes to mind first. I do sneaky things sometimes that I'm not supposed to do. And so once in a while, someone will ask me to play just a little show somewhere. And I know that my agent probably wouldn't go for it, especially if it doesn't pay well or if it's free. But if it's friends putting it together, I said, look, just don't put my name on the bill and I'll show up and we'll have some fun. And I did a show like that just a week or two ago, and there was a young woman performing there under the name Blunt Chunks. And but I'm telling you, her music is there's something a little experimental about it. It's a one-woman show, but there's real talent. It's not. I've seen shows like this before where it's just someone that has some wild ideas but not a lot of talent, and it's just sort of a mess. But this person is doing it right and is creating music that's very beautiful. Sort of soundscapey. There's something almost ambient about it, and she was a very magnetic performer as well. I don't know if her music is Radio 2 material, but I was really quite taken with it, and so it may be worth kind of. You won't forget the name, Blunt Chunks. But keep an eye peeled. And as far as advice goes, it's so different from when I started, but to make it these days, I just don't know, how you do it, because it seems that the emphasis is not on talent the way it used to be. So you got to. It's a given that you have to have some musical ideas. You have to have some good songs, but it's not enough. So you really have to, get a whole thing together, an image and a look and all that. I hate that I'm saying this because I'm not a big buyer as far as that whole idea goes, but it just does seem to be the way these days. And a thing that I always tell people is that interviews are actually very important because this is going to be your introduction to people in a lot of cases. And so someone who is seeing, reading, hearing your interview has a few bucks in their pocket, and it's your job during that interview process to get those few bucks out of their pocket so that when it's over, they'll say, hey, that person was real interesting and I like what they had to say and I want to invest in them. Because I think that's how people spend their money right now. It's not just enough to say, I like that song, because there are too many ways and places where you can get that song for free. So you got to get someone interested in you as a person. And that's, charm is something, it's hard to fake or whatever, but it's important these days. And so you really got to, it's kind of awful, but you need a bit of that. I will say though, remembering that I am a radio host, that we have a pretty great team that works in the music department for Radio 2, and we get just demos sent every day, and they listen to stuff, and if it's good, we'll play it. And we've played things from major labels right next to things that have just been made by people in their bedroom. If the song's good, we'll play it. So it does seem that Radio 2 is sort of the last safe haven for the person for whom it's really just all about the music, which is, something that I really love about working there.
Yeah. Last question. What are your thoughts on the recent debate about ghostwriting in hip-hop?
Oh, yeah, that's a thing. It's funny because I don't know if that would be as big a deal anywhere else with any kind of writing and really within any other genre. But in the world of hip-hop, this is a really super big deal. And so the idea of someone else writing for you is just something that a lot of people really seem to have a hard time with. And my feelings on it, to be perfectly honest, are mixed. I started to get into the music in the real early days where those ideas and those laws, unwritten laws, were originally laid down, and the thought, of that in those days was blasphemous to the point where, you would be just kicked out. You wouldn't have a chance. And so there's still a part of me that thinks, this, it's not right. You gotta write your own stuff. But at this point in my life, I just really want to hear a good song. And what happens in the studio, I just kind of don't care. I'm not gonna change my mind. If I love a song and then I hear that someone else wrote it than who I thought, that doesn't really mean too much to me. So just depending on, where I'm at on any given day, my feelings on it, might change. But I don't know, at the end of the day, a good song's a good song, right? I mean, if it's a terrible song and then you found out that the person who claimed they wrote it didn't, then clearly that's kind of terrible. When we first entered this cabin in the woods in Eugene,
I'm telling you, I know your editor's like, keep it in.
it was, we opened the door and the whole cabin was filled with animals. And they weren't all like pets.
Did they come with the strippers?
Well,
Were they already there? Like I don't.
yeah, they were already there,
They were
like because
already
the
there.
windows were all broken out, and so animals could just get in. So like there were like raccoons and bobcats, and because the place was so
There were
like
bobcats?
yeah, there was, you name it. I think there was a Sasquatch in there. But because this cabin was so like dirty and gross, this is the image I'll never forget. Opening the door, clicking on the light with the chain, seeing all these animals, but they were all itchy. Just like a room full of animals scratching themselves.
Did it make you itchy? Like, did you have that?
Yeah.
reaction? Are
You can't
feeling
not,
scratched
you
too?
see that,
Yeah,
your own
it
skin
is.
starts to
Yeah,
crawl,
yeah. Loved your performance at Club Soda in Montreal.
Oh yeah, it was a good one.
How did it feel to throw out a game-opening ball at a major league game?
Okay, right. So, if you don't know this about baseball, it's big on tradition, and a game won't start until somebody throws out what's called the ceremonial first pitch. And it is sort of a ceremonial thing. And so, some sort of guest of honor will come out, throw a pitch, and now it's time to play. And most people would consider that a huge honor. And I found out somehow a few years ago that a woman who works as an executive in the Chicago Cubs organization likes my music, and so extended this invitation to me to go to Chicago, the oldest or second oldest ballpark in the major leagues, hallowed. I mean, it's practically a museum that still functions on a daily basis, and throw out this first pitch. And maybe I'm giving away some stuff in the book here, maybe not. My baseball dreams did not come true. I didn't play professional baseball, but I never really let go of the dream. And I really did put in those hours in my backyard, throwing the ball against the wall. And I did come close. I impressed a scout from the New York Yankees when I was 16. And it still pains me that it didn't work out. And I still wish so bad every day that it had of. It's where I want to be. And so when I had this opportunity to participate in a big league park, I thought, you gotta let this be the moment. You gotta let all those days and hours in the backyard lead to this. This has to count. And for that matter, I thought, this is such a thrill. Let all the hardship of the last few years of the divorce and everything else all add up to this being an ultimately redemptive moment for you. So I promised myself that I would run out on the mound and just stand there and soak it in for a minute and look around. And it was a Saturday, it was sold out, there's 30,000+ people there. And just take a moment to flash through all that. Before I did, I had a brief conversation with the Cubs' third baseman, who was Luis Valbuena. He now plays for Houston. And I said, look, I'm going to bring it. I'm going to throw this thing hard, because I didn't want to catch him off guard, because usually it's just a polite thing and people will give it a little toss. I worked way too hard for this moment, so I was going to let this thing rip with almost everything I had. And he smiled and said, oh, all right, who is this guy? But let's see what you got. And we ran out there, and I pumped this thing in, and I threw it hard enough that it moved. It wasn't straight. It was a four-seam fastball with break going this way, caught the black. It was a strike. And his face lit up. And the moment I will never forget, and I might say was the greatest moment of my life, was to hear 30,000 people in this historic stadium cheer for me. And it wasn't just like a clap, like, hey, there you go, you did it. It was, whoa. To hear 30,000 people do that at the same time, my God, that felt good. So that was it. That was my moment. It could not, the short answer to your question is that it could not have felt better. It was the greatest moment of my life.
This says, you like to find things, don't you? What have you found lately that you're really proud of?
Let's see.
I didn't know you like to find things. You like just to find...
Well, yeah, I'm always on some sort of path of discovery, treasure hunt. Well, let's see. And I'm a collector. I collect a lot of stuff. So books and a lot of baseball related things, and some music related things as well. I guess my favorite discovery thing I found recently is a super bizarre hip-hop song, a record, a single from 85, I think, 1985, called My Face Is All Numb. And it's one of the weirdest things I've ever heard. And I really prided myself on, I didn't think that I could discover music from that time that I didn't already know about. So it was almost shocking to me to hear one that slipped through the cracks somehow. This song was not a hit. I don't think there's too many people that know about it. And it's still new to me, so I can't remember the name of the guy who recorded it, but it's very bizarre. And the thing that was sort of en vogue at the time was a lot of like say no to drugs type songs. Mm-hmm. That was the big message of the day, and what people were proud of to say. So this went so against the grain, and not that I support this sort of thing at all, but clearly this was a song made by a messed up person, and he's talking about his experience with drugs, which was just an incredibly unusual thing for the times, and is probably why it was a small release, never picked up by a big label. And this guy wasn't even really particularly talented, to be honest with you. But it's such a bizarre thing. And there is a very popular song by a Toronto artist called The Weeknd that came out in the last year or so called I Can't Feel My Face or something. And I thought, oh my God, this is that same song, but he was beaten to the punch by 30 years. I mean, my face is all numb. It's the same message. So I will say that was the first thing I thought. I was like, holy smokes, because that song is a hit now. The times have changed.
It was just too soon.
So people love this song by The Weeknd, and so I raced to Twitter and said, okay, if you like I Can't Feel My Face, you're going to love this. I haven't had the chance to play it on the CBC yet. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's up there. That was a good one.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure talking with you.